Hello and welcome to Identerati Office Hours. I'm your host, Mike Schwartz, founder of Glue, and today is episode 97. The topic is Patterns and Anti-Patterns in Privileged Access Management, or PAM for short. Quick housekeeping, if you want to support the live stream, please do that by following the live stream on LinkedIn. Our guest today is Rainer Hörbe, coach. And I'm just going to say Identerati today. Identerati, longtime Identerati, and even I would say mentor because I've learned so many things from Rainer. And Martin Sanderson, or Martin Sandrin from now at IKEA, formerly at Nixu. Welcome, guys.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
Sorry for the botched intro. As I mentioned to Martin and Rainer before, this is an early live stream for me, and it's been unusually busy at the Glue headquarters here. So let's dive into it. But before we do that, I'd love to hear for you guys to share a little bit more about your backgrounds. Martin, let's start with you. How did you find yourself to become an identity expert?
Well, it's the kind of the usual thing that I actually, when I was back at university, I started working in the computer labs. And then after I got my master's, I started working as an IM or a security specialist for a ERP vendor in Sweden. And then I worked for a while there, and then I moved to Germany, did security for a company there. And then I started doing IM full time when I joined a small boutique firm called Senna Systems in London to do IM implementations. And I started doing implementations on Tor Accelerate, which later became Oracle Identity Manager.
Okay, long time. And Rainer, why don't you tell us a little bit about your career? How'd you get here?
Yeah, so I'm for a couple of years in IT, and in the late 1990s, I started in a large government project where we spinned off an identity management program for access management using PKI and IDPs, etc. So that was my first real encounter with identity management and federation. So since then, I had various roles. I was mostly self-employed as an architect, security policy writer, and developer. And since 6 years, I'm now an IM architect with KPMG in Austria, and doing things like usually with some twist to or some spin to regulatory affairs, architecture from the top level to some detail, more technical levels.
So I'm going to leave you in the hot seat, Rainer, and let's kick off the actual conversation today. Patterns and anti-patterns in privileged access management. You know, I have an authorization sort of centric view of the world. Why do we need privileged access management? Isn't privileged access management just an acknowledgement that our authorization systems have failed?
In the theoretical world, well, that is where everything is secure. Yes, you authorize a person, and then just the privileged identity executes the assigned privileges, and everything would be fine as well, and we would be eating honey cookies. However, it just isn't. We have, particularly in legacy systems, tons of vulnerabilities, legacy designs that are inherently insecure, and we need a good security design. So let me pick just one because it's around. I don't want to point on Microsoft, but Active Directory by design is not secure. And people, it's so pervasive. You use it for authentication and for authorization for almost everything in an intranet. Well, maybe not in a cloud environment. And it took years to come to better practices, and there was also the approach to shift the whole thing to the cloud and to AAD and now Enter-ID. But people realized you never are replacing anything in IT. You're always going to add new things, but you need the old stuff. You need to keep it running. So.
Let's put a pause there for a second. I'd love to give Martin a chance to respond. Martin, is Rainer right that it sounds like what you said was we need privileged access management because we know our old systems are broken, basically, or insecure. Do you agree with that, Martin?
Well, I think old is one part of it, one dimension, but it's also the simple fact that if you try to protect everything, you will protect nothing. So if you look at an enterprise, if you have your access controls, may it be in Active Directory, may it be in Entra, may it be some other IDP system, you very quickly have 100, 200, 300 people who have write rights into the system, because you have the kind of the central IAMS teams, you have local IT, you have the help desk. So it becomes really hard if you look at something that is really sensitive. May it be financially sensitive, or may it be a privacy problem, or other reasons. It's not very well protected if there's 300 people you can fish and you can get access to it. So I think there is a very strong motivation to have systems that are controlled by relatively few people. But that, of course, means that you cannot really put all the business processes for the entire company into that, because you can never support that with a 5 to 10 people team.
So okay, that paints a pretty good picture. And so what you're saying is that the privileged access management is like the authorization system of last resort. Like maybe we want to design a new way to do authorization because clearly we want to centralize policies, but we need this authorization system for these systems that didn't really design all the legacy stuff. Is that right?
No, I wouldn't agree. I would rather extend on what Martin said.
Okay.
So that's a very, very catchy phrase. If you try to protect everything, you are protecting nothing. So if you want to secure access to a system, particularly, let's say, administrative access, you not only need to take care of your entitlements in the sense of request and 4I principle reviews, approvals, etc. You also need to harden your systems. You have to have a high level of assurance when accessing these systems. So that means strong authentication, so non-phishable authenticators. You need to have a very good identity verification and trustworthiness of the person, and you need a very strong endpoint protection. Let me take, for example, the regulations for the EU regulations for the financial sector, DORA, or for critical infrastructure, NIS2. They explicitly say that on an administrative system, you must not execute anything which is not needed for the task, the administrative tasks. So you are not doing, and the problem is, if you have a standard Office workstation with reasonable usability, with your group work and email and open internet browser, this is impossible to really secure properly. Whatever authorization you assign to the person, an attacker might subvert it and gain additional capabilities or entitlements, and then you're breached.
Is the scope really that big? Like down to, I mean, if a person's on a browser, you can't. What, Martin? Maybe you could reflect on that a little bit.
Well, it is the question if you're talking about accessing the most tier zero, but we're in the Entra world. You often talk about tier zero, tier one, tier two, and then upwards. So the really sensitive systems. The question is, in the tier zero systems, is a normal laptop okay for accessing those? And in many cases, the answer is, well, you can get quite a lot of advantage if you have a lockdown secure access workstation. And that can be part of your PAM system typically. So you use your normal laptop to log on to the PAM system, and then you use that as the secure access workstation. But if you're extremely paranoid, of course, then you have an additional layer of a secure access workstation that you use to log on to your PAM system.
And Rainer, let's pivot back to the topic. So the topic was, it's patterns and anti-patterns. Let's start with the anti-patterns first. So I think we sort of established like the use case for why we have privileged access management and sort of dove into it just a tiny bit. What are the things you shouldn't do here? What are the anti-patterns?
Usually, I'd like to start with assets. Say the organization or the enterprise really needs to understand what their assets are, what they are going to protect, what is the protection need, or what is the tier for the privileged access. And this needs to be governed with a proper life cycle. So it's not a one-time shot. So out of that asset management, I can define what are my crown jewels, what is my most critical service, and I will focus on
the anti-pattern here. Sorry to interrupt. So the anti-pattern here is not identifying your critical assets.
Right, and so I was going to say what we find in some less mature organizations is that there was a fairly tiny team of administrators which would not be connected to any IGA system, to identity management processes, asset management, and stuff like that. But they do it on their own. They say, we don't trust the general IT, we do everything on our own. But you have no governance, you have no thorough security processes, security design, etc. So that is what I would say, the major anti-pattern.
Interesting. Martin, thoughts on anti-patterns? Like what are some of the anti-patterns here for PAM?
Well, I think the first part when you have we kind of started thinking about PAM is what problems are you trying to solve? What business problem are you trying to solve for the business? So are we talking about to resolve audit findings is of course an important part, because if you're a regulated business, if you don't solve your audit findings, you will lose your license to operate. You could also see that the purpose of your PAM is to increase your resilience, or it could be because of the nature of your business is such that you have a number of very legacy systems that really requires that you have proper management of secrets. And if those secrets kind of gets loose, even internally, you lose your segregation of duty, and then you have a situation where you put your staff into a position where they may be tempted to commit fraud. So the first part I would say in any PAM rollout is to try to figure out what problem am I trying to solve, and how does this PAM program support the business?
Okay, so not correctly identifying what PAM business problem you're actually solving and focusing on that. And
correct.
And Rainer, it sounds like what you're saying. Well, in addition to not knowing what your assets are, you also might have a core group of people who are outside of the whole management framework, the governance framework, And that's obviously going to be a problem for, especially if they have access to those high value assets. Any other anti-patterns that
Oh
you're
yeah,
thinking of? We're just
unfortunately,
getting started.
many. Well, this is not PAM specific, but we find it frequently in privileged access management. So management decides we need PAM because of regulatory requirements or an exchange at the golf course with other C-level execs. So then they say, let's put out an RFP or do a market study, and people purchase something which is probably quite capable, but they haven't done security design, security architecture, and they are putting PAM on top of the existing structure. So as an architect, I'm biased, but I think it absolutely pays off to do a decent security architecture first and have a migration concept, and then select the proper product and put it out there.
Sounds reasonable to me. So yeah, design first, implement later, instead of like buy solution first, hope it will solve your whatever problem you throw at it later. Martin, any more anti-pattern thoughts?
Well, I think the most common, if you exclude the pattern where you don't have any PAM, I think the most common PAM anti-pattern is that you spend too much of your total resources on installing a quite complex PAM product. And then once you're done with that, you're so exhausted that you don't have the funding or the energy or the credibility to actually use the product to run onboard application onto it. That is often the hardest part, to try to kind of get the PAM implementation to get off the ground, because either you get in a situation where you buy the product, you implement it, and then you're out of money, or you get a situation where you do that and you have some money, so you go out and onboard a few applications, and that was so painful and time consuming that you only end up with a handful of application on the system, and then you get stuck, right, unable to continue.
Yeah, that one sounds lack of follow through on operation. I always say operations in a way is harder than the initial rollout. You think you do the initial rollout and you're done, but sometimes the long-term operation never ends. And so it's not necessarily a project, but an ongoing effort. And that effort, especially if you had challenges in the initial rollout, it could be hard to keep up the momentum. That makes it sound to me, when you talk about it, like how many systems are using the PAM, it really seems like we know it's not going to cover all the systems, so it sounds like a compromise right off the bat. Rainer, more anti-pattern. Should we keep going? You said you had lots.
Yeah. It's somehow related to the last one. So jumping on product selection instead of architecture. I think if you do a PAM project, particularly a greenfield PAM project, you should have IGA people in the team. So because in IGA, we usually understand you have an identity lifecycle to manage, you have the account lifecycle, provisioning, entitlements, credential management, etc. And you shouldn't reinvent the wheel for anything IGA does in PAM. So using multi-factor authentication should come from the enterprise SSO service, which should be there anyway, and all the other lifecycle management processes are in place. If they aren't done properly there, so you say, it's not secure enough for PAM, then I think you have got another problem. So if there is time, then fix IGA first, and then hook up PAM for the remaining tasks.
I was going to hassle you about that a little bit when I heard you throw in authentication requirements, because, I mean, by the time you get to the PAM, that should already be resolved. And it sounds like the privileged access management system, I used to think of it as like almost like a secrets vault. It's like where you store the root password for Active Directory. How much of the authorization capabilities now for PAMs actually it goes beyond that, just storing like the root password?
Well, this is not really authorization; it's authentication, right? Secrets management.
I guess so. I guess, like I said, I'm not really a PAM expert, but I don't know, Martin. What would you say are the core features here for PAM? Maybe I just need a refresher.
Well, so it's a bit of it's a really interesting question actually. So if you look at PAM, you have something that we sometimes refer to as trad PAM. So it's the idea that what you do with your PAM system is that you go either horizontally, say I want to control the entire Windows Server environment, or you go vertically, say okay, I identify my 10 crown jewel applications, and then I onboard everything on them, from application layer to database layer to application layers to everything that has to do with those, all the accounts and secrets. You suck them into a vault, and then you control them from there. And you have all of the features with the secure workstation and the session recording, etc. So this kind of trad PAM, how we've been doing things for a long time. What has been happening is that, especially if you're talking about more of a cloud-based applications, is that you start to look at zero standing privileges instead. And instead of sucking in all of these accounts, so you can easily have 30, 40, 50 accounts per application. It's not uncommon. It's decently big applications, and you have a lot of different layers to cover. You have a few really high privileged accounts that you have in the PAM system that gives you, for example, full access to your entire Entra estate. And then in runtime, you create the access that the user needs based on what they actually need at that point in time. And you get a short-lived session with that access. And then once your lifetime of your for example, change ticket disappears, then the access is revoked. So it is a little bit more the modern PAM. And that is, of course, a lot easier to do in a more modern cloud-based environment compared to if you're heavily on-premise, where you don't really have these kind of really high privileged accounts in the same way.
And Rainer, maybe that's a good segue for, okay, we've talked about some of the anti-patterns. Maybe we could actually start talking about some of the patterns that we want to move to.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, which is just the other side of the coin usually. So the isolation patterns are pretty important, and they are also pretty old. If you do tiering and multi-forest design in Active Directory, which is not really new, we have been doing that. And so the idea is we define from a certain on the level of the network, access controls, authentication, etc. We define an access path to an administrative zone, which is a different path than the standard access. And this is an isolation pattern. We need to follow through. Privileged access has to be isolated somehow. So as Martin said, the administrator will use let's say, a secure access workstation or a privileged access workstation, which is hardened. So you log into that one using some MFA, which usually needs to be tweaked in a way which is very easy to use and still secure, like a U2F or so. And from this secure access workstation, you can easily access everything you do. But there are more things to that for privileged access, CI/CD pipelines for file transfer, etc. But the interactive access is usually the first pattern, which is secure this way using isolation.
Martin, maybe you could build a little bit on what you're saying about web applications and SaaS applications, because that is the most commonly used these days. There's, I think, 50,000 B2B websites out there. Are there certain patterns we can use for privileged access management?
So what we have been seeing over the last, say, 5 years or so is the idea of consolidation. So basically, the concept is that if you look 5-10 years ago, if you were a product owner in an enterprise, you needed to do IM. You went out and said, okay, I need to buy an IJ system to do IJ. I need to buy some access management to do access management, and I need to buy a PAM platform. And these platforms were 3 quite well-defined categories that are quite separate. So on the IGA side, you might buy a SailPoint or a Savient or something like that. On the access part, you might say I'm an Entra shop or I'm an Okta shop or something like that.
Or glue shop.
Or a glue shop. On the PAM side, you might say that I'm a Delinea shop or I'm a CyberArk shop or something. So just name a few. But now all these categories have started to become together. So if you look at it, that CyberArk, for example, does a certain amount of IGA today. Likewise, especially I think Savient was the first shop that started off the IGA-centric ones that started doing PAM. So you have a consolidation where you go towards best of suites instead. And this is a little bit similar to what we saw like 2006, 2008, when Oracle, IBM, CA, the big boys at that time, tried to build these big suites that did everything within identity and access management. But the PAM side has been the first part, kind of. A lot of the IGA vendors, I think, were the first to start branching into PAM, and then specifically into cloud PAM, because that was the biggest challenge. We had the KEAM functionality and similar.
It's interesting because I don't know. I guess I'm a PAM skeptic, or I just don't see it as a category. I see it as a stopgap solution or a specific application of authorization, and because I don't know. It's an interesting perspective. Rainer, what are you seeing as some of the patterns for cloud specifically? Not just on-prem, but these plethora of B2B applications out there.
Yeah, so we have a different entitlement management. So typically PAM capability is cloud infrastructure entitlement management theme. And you have these roadmaps and strategies like for Azure, from Microsoft, how to do this differently from an on-prem environment. In on-prem, you are not managing workloads, which you do in cloud. So this is one thing. Another one is key management. In my view, that's a little bit a closest of the emperor game. If you look at certificate lifecycle management, key management solutions for the cloud, you get a little bit independence from the keys provided by your CSP, but not really. So you still have a lot of trust there. So this is a hairy topic, particularly if you're looking into the regulation for financial industry. Well, at least you can do it literally, but my personal view, there is not too much security gain there. But Martin, maybe you have a different view on that.
Well, it is an interesting question about how you will do this. I think definitely a lot of kind of trad PAM installations are struggling to embrace the cloud and get out and get all the secrets and NHI, non-human entities, and other things into the scope. And it is the also it's an interesting question about where the IAM team's area of responsibility ends and where the responsibility of the different cloud teams starts, for example.
Mhm.
Is it the IAM's job to just create identities and then perhaps do some group membership and then go like, yeah, here we stop, especially when we talk about deprovisioning use cases and removal use cases. Or does the IAM team have a bit more stake in that area?
At the risk of dating myself, I'm going to talk about one of my old jobs. But I worked for a big company called ADP, big payroll company, and we were implementing SiteMinder. I was on the SiteMinder architecture team, and we were proud of ourselves because we were integrating 10 applications per year, and we had 100 applications, and we said, in 10 years we're going to be done at this rate. And we decided realistically that wasn't really a good option, and so we moved to SAML, and we moved to this. We said, okay, apps, instead of us integrating you top down, here's the SAML, here's the standard with which you have to integrate yourselves. And here's how you do it, and ask us any questions. And then we were able to move in parallel and get these applications single sign-on enabled more quickly. Is there a similar approach maybe that we could have in the PAM sector where instead of saying to the, thinking of this top down, we're going to integrate you with this PAM to enable standards or at least instructions, whether it's standard or not, how do you integrate yourself to use the policy management system of the enterprise? Rainer, I'll let you take the hot seat on that one.
Probably too much technician to not seeing many problems and not so easy solutions to that. The first one is in the field, we usually encounter tons of legacy applications. So as I said, all the cloud stuff is coming on top. It's not replacing the old stuff, the core banking systems or whatever. And so, well, let me keep it short. No.
So that's sort of where I'm asking you the same question I started with, I guess, which is PAM just the authorization system for the legacy stuff? Martin, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, I think the first part is to kind of recognize that the entire SAML and YDC space, access management, is the great success story of our industry. So the first federation I did was back in 2001. And at that point, there really wasn't any, commonly used SAML. I don't think there was any even. So we integrated two ERP systems. I think we ended about spending 150 days of effort to do that. And, that is huge. Now, right now, we typically integrate 30 to 50 applications per month. It takes my engineers in India, if you include all the time it takes to click in the ServiceNow system and so on, 2 to 3 hours. Technical work is often like 30 minutes to do the SAML integration. And that is exactly the same thing that took me 150 days 20 years ago or 25 years ago.
The first glue server took 60 days to install, and now you can install it in a Docker container in like 2 seconds. But yeah, that's another.
So there's clearly that we have done some really good things in the access management, and in an enterprise, it's by no means uncommon that you have 1,000 or 1,500 application or 2,000 application. So on the access management side, we have managed to make it easy to integrate. But both on the IGA and PAM side, we haven't really achieved that yet. Like if you look at the time it takes to onboard an application into PAM, it is very easy to spend 10, 15 days on it, because you need to identify all the different accounts. You need to look at how is the application, how is the team working, does the PAM tool support all the things that you do, etc., etc. And I do think that obviously there is a lot of use cases where trad PAM is what you need. Like if you have an application where you really need the session management and the session recording and all of those things, it's that trad PAM is kind of how you should be doing things, and it's hard to see a huge difference. But you also do see that for more modern application that runs in the cloud and that has a more kind of standardized way of doing things, perhaps you don't need to go and kind of suck in all this application, all these accounts into the vaults. Perhaps you can kind of integrate within the cloud team's framework and get to a much better understanding for what access people have in a lot less effort. But I do think that this is quite early days for that kind of movement. But even if you look at and of course there is a lot of companies who are highly regulated and really need the big on-premise systems. But for a lot of companies that are primarily looking at, okay, I need to improve my resilience a bit, perhaps I should use a PAM system to put a little bit of a speed bump in front of attackers. Running things, the cloud versions of the various PAM systems are getting quite good. They're not as good and not as flexible and can't do everything that an on-premise can, but they can do quite a lot for a lot of companies and to a much faster value to market to get it out there and start onboarding applications.
May I have a second thought on your previous question?
Please.
Regarding the integration into PAM, there is one trend that many administrative tools tend to provide a web interface. So integration into standard protocols like Web RDP, Citrix, and SSH is a no-brainer. So from that kind of development, which is not that fast, but which is improving, that will help with integration. It's different from SAML and OIDC, but this is going to improve things.
Well, let's actually. Well, I guess we have time for one more question. Any other? So we maybe have time for one more pattern, one more positive pattern.
Yeah. So. In less mature organizations, we frequently find that they use SSH in a default fashion, which is worse than traditional password management. So no expiration dates of keys, people can delegate without control. We have by default many authentication methods enabled. So you just name it. There are tons of things, and so the pattern is to have a very strict control. There is like SSH.com very active in that, and I'm an evangelist there in that area. So to do that properly, because it's so critical in many organizations, and the default is really bad.
Right, and just to throw out a vendor here that I'm a big fan of too, which is Go Teleport, and they're using certificates. So they issue you a short-lived certificate which you present for SSH authentication, and that certificate can contain organizational information and be input to policy on that server. That's an interesting one because I think people forget about the about the Linux servers, which is a lot of the important infrastructure. Martin, last lesson, positive lesson before we go into last thoughts?
Well, I think the main lesson is understand how the PAM supports your business, and then see how can you make sure that you can use as much of your available budget for really delivering business value, and to build a kind of a positive cycle when you do a PAM implementation, and not get stuck with the first spending majority of your resources just standing up the infrastructure, and then having a few implementations that are very kind of painful, and then everyone says that I don't want to be on PAM because it's lots of effort and so on. The trick is to kind of make sure that you have the resource available to make the first few PAM onboardings to a positive experience for the teams. If you manage to do that, then you can start a positive cycle where you can get more funding to get more application to your platform. But of course, it's always easier said than done.
Yeah. Let's actually go into last thoughts. That was kind of a good summary, but maybe Rainer, last thoughts before we break.
Yeah. So try to if you're doing PAM, do a security architecture, security design first, and integrate your existing IG and asset management processes, so you have a sustainable implementation of your product.
Okay. So with that, I will announce the next episode, the Eclipse Decentralized Claims Protocol. So this is actually when I wrote this article about token-based access control, and a number of people raised their hand and said, yeah, we're already doing that. And I said, that's really interesting. It's good support that people are using this token-based access control in the real world. And I invited them all onto the live stream. And I've never heard of this Eclipse Decentralized Claims Protocol. Peter Cohn, engineer from Microsoft, is going to join us and tell us about it with one of his colleagues. So it should be interesting. In a way, I have to say, what you said to me today sounds like token-based access control. The privilege access management issues a certificate, and this has a session, and it has entitlement information, and that's input to policy at the server. In a way, PAM sounds like a type of perhaps token-based access control, where the token is maybe an X509 certificate. Anyway, we're going to talk more token-based access control in the next episode. So with that, I'll say thank you, Rainer. Thank you, Martin, for joining us. Thank you, audience, and we'll see you next time.